On today's Locked On Texan podcast, we look at the defensive side of the ball. Whose stock is rising, whose stock is falling, and who's on the bubble. Let's start the show.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, everybody, to a Hump Day episode of the Locked On Texan podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. I am your Texan football analyst, John, some Sports Guy Hickman. And of course, joining me is none other than your Texan credential media member and Sports Illustrated's own Cody Davis. If you are new to the Locked On Texan podcast, do us a favor, subscribe, like, and comment on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Thank you for stopping by. If you are one of our returning players from the Himalayas, I know y'all ready to talk Texans and look at the defensive side of the ball. Thank you for coming back, but look at the defensive side of the ball. The bubble cuts, not the bubble guts, but the bubble cuts. Who may make it, who may not make it, which defensive player stock is falling. But here on the Locked On Texan podcast, we like to be positive first for the most part. Which defensive player stock has been rising? If we go back to training camp, if we go back to, maybe OTAs in the summertime before training camp even got here till now, Cody, in your eyes as a man that's been out on that field each and every day.
In the heat
of the night, in the heat of the day, which defensive player stock has been rising?
If I had to pick, I'm going with Jacob Martin. Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. You remember a couple weeks ago, I had an opportunity to do an exclusive interview with Jacob Martin, fresh off the practice field. And I talked about his journey, everything that he went through last year, signing with the New York Jets, being traded to the Denver Broncos. And then at the start of free agency, he was released. John, I remember when we got the news that Martin had re-signed with the Houston Texans a couple weeks before training camp. I wasn't sure what to expect from Jacob because everyone who's been rocking with this podcast for an extremely long time, I think it's safe to say that you and I basically covered Jacob Martin's first whole entire tenure with the Houston Texans. Got here in 2009. I believe that was our first year covering this team. And of course, we saw Jacob Martin slowly but surely kind of find his niche. However, when you take a look at the decline that he had last season, I wasn't sure what the Houston Texans was getting back in Martin, but to him, most importantly, I thought due to the fact that he missed OTAs and mandatory minicamp, he was a late addition to this roster. I kind of viewed it as him being behind the 8 ball. However, ever since the start of training camp, this young man has been very good. Almost every single day throughout training camp, we came on this show and talked about how good that defense looked, how good the front seven looked, how good that defensive line looked. And Jacob Martin was one of the guys who has helped improve that defensive unit.
Yeah, Jacob has done a good job in practice. He's been consistent in practice, and he's shown the ability to set the edge, to rush the passer. So encouraged with some of the things Jacob has done in practice, and that he went out there first in the game, and that's what preseason is all about, right? There are no starters or nothing is set. It's just about us seeing, right, what can our team actually look like and giving guys multiple looks, multiple opportunities.
Martin did start in Saturday's preseason loss to the Miami Dolphins. He started over Jerry Hughes and Jonathan Grenard, and that is not an indication that Jacob Martin has received a starting job. However, that just lets me know that the Houston Texans are definitely looking at Jacob Martin as one of the guys to make the 53-man roster. But at the end of the day, this is a young man who has embodied Coach DeMeco Ryan's swarm mentality over the course of his career, he has registered 16 sacks in 74 games. Don't be surprised when you get that 53-man roster and you see Jacob Martin's name on there.
Guys, you want to know who I really do like to make this team? And we're looking at the defensive side of the ball, of course, but if we look at that front four, I really like Khalil Davis, man. I think Khalil Davis is a player that has been making it extremely hard for other defensive tackles to get out on the field. And he's been making it harder for the Texans to justify not keeping him in favor of another player, which we'll get into, who has not had an opportunity to showcase what he can do or not. This is a business league, and Khalil Davis, who was just signed to the Houston Texans a couple of weeks ago, so far during training camp, 5 solo tackles, 6 overall. He's been very good against the run, has 3 run stops, 4 quarterback hits, 4 total pressures. So he's been able to get to the quarterback. He's been able to get into that backfield and get some plays on that running back, get a couple of tackle for losses. And what I like the most is I'm not looking at Khalil Davis to be the starter. We have Malik Collins here in Houston. The Texans signed Sheldon Rankins, Malik Collins and Sheldon Rankins look very good playing next to one another against Miami. They also have a son, Ridgeway, another player which I'm not too sure about keeping him, but Khalil Davis has fit in perfectly. And I like what I've seen from the young man just 2 or 3 weeks removed from getting signed to this franchise. So he's a player I think stock has been rising tremendously. Also, Kobe Francis, the cornerback. I like Kobe Francis. I think that, again, he's a player I'm not expecting for him to go start. I'm not expecting for him to be, a 50% snap guy, but I'm expecting for him to be good for special teams. I'm expecting for him to, whenever his number is called, to be formidable, right? To not be a liability, which is some of the things that we've been seeing from the Houston Texans in the past couple of seasons. Also, guys, you know who I really do like? Cody. I like this young man. He is a year removed from coming over from, was it Great Britain? From overseas, over across the pond. Adebayo. He's a guy that I thought completely didn't have a shot to make this roster. And I'm not saying he does have a shot now, but when we look at stocks rising and falling, he's a player that stock has risen in the past couple of weeks. Going back to practice, throughout training camp, when he gets on the field, his size alone makes it a little bit more difficult for opposing offensive players, offensive tackles, and maybe tight ends or whoever's chipping on him or whatever. And I like Derek Rivers. Derek Rivers,
special teams.
Yeah, man. Derek Rivers. I like Derek Rivers. I really do, and I like Derek Rivers because he's a vet. He's been able to, play in this league, be successful at some point in the league. By the way, Kobe Francis, has only allowed a passer rating of 39.6. So, and he also has 1 defensive stop and a pass deflection. I like Kobe Francis. I actually like Kobe Francis over another cornerback that I can't wait to talk about, who I don't believe will make this roster. But between the defensive front, I go back to Khalil Davis. I look at Adebayo. I look at Derek Rivers as guys that just keep your eye out on them. And Adebayo may just be a practice squad guy again. Derek Rivers could be the guy that can shore up some of that defensive end depth, which I'm interested to see how they address it, right? We know about John Grenard. We know about Will Anderson Jr. There's another guy that I want to name, but I'm not just 100% sure about him. But Houston has an opportunity to really get some good depth across that defensive line before they go into the regular season.
Before moving on, I do want to add one more name to my list. Grayland Arnold. This is a young man who spent majority of last season with the practice squad roster. However, given the fact that for the second consecutive year, he has had a really good training camp. Plus, when you take a look at the departure of Jonathan Owens, I do believe that's part of the reason why he was on the practice squad roster last year. But Grayland Arnold is a guy I definitely would not be surprised at when we get that 53-man roster next week. I truly do believe his name is going to be on there as a rotational guy in the Texans secondary. secondary. The Texans have recorded, I believe, about 14 to 15 takeaways throughout training camp, and he has one of the many interceptions. So he already has the mentality, making plays throughout training camp. Had a pretty decent preseason. You already know what he can do, dating all the way back to last year. I think this young man is really going to have a spot on the Texans 53-man roster this year.
I like Graylin. You know, I've liked Graylin since last year. I thought they should have kept him. I don't know if Graylin beats out MJ Stewart.
Oh, that's a good.
I don't know if Graylin beats out.
Or maybe they keep both in Eric Murray.
I don't know.
Finally.
I think Eric Murray makes the team.
Why? Which is something we've been rooting against since.
I know, right? And it's kind of crazy, but I do think Eric Murray makes this team. The battle between Graylin Arnold and MJ Stewart may just come down to this week's preseason game. MJ Stewart has been playing some very good football for Houston, and I like his ability to come down and support in the run. So keep an eye out on that battle. Keep an eye out on the battle of edge rushers as well. But these are guys, their stocks have been rising. Let's talk about defensive players that stocks has been falling when we come back. Bird dogs make you look and feel good. A Bird Dog stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. Bird Dog shorts do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but fit way better. They fit better than regular shorts that are made from a stiff, restricting cotton. Let me tell you what Bird Dog does, man. They fixed that issue by inventing a cloud knit fabric that looks just like a khaki but stretches so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. Can't beat that. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for a free white tech hat with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for a free white tech hat. You won't want to take off your Bird Dog shorts or khakis. I promise you.
Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to this latest installment of Locked On Texans. Later on today, hopefully we can find out whether or not which starters are going to play in Sunday's preseason game against the New Orleans Saints. We will have an opportunity to hear from D'Amico Ryans. I'm pretty sure we will also speak to CJ Stroud and possibly Davis Mills as well. So make sure you keep an eye out on that as the Houston Texans prepare for their final preseason game ahead of the 2023 campaign. And with that being said, John, we got to look into it. Defensive player stock who has fallen since the end of training camp, man. And if I could just shout out one of my all-time favorite singers, Anita Baker, I apologize, plain and simple. I apologize.
Can I start it off?
Because you already know where both of us about to go. Go ahead, my brother. Take it away.
Texan fans, I'm in favor of Kobe Francis making his team because I am not in favor, and I think this player really needs a good outing in this third preseason game. I think this player is on the bubble when I look at Shaquille Griffin. So there's not a benefit financially in cutting him. Houston would have much more dead money compared to what they'd save. He still might be a good insurance policy, but between practices and preseason games, I haven't seen enough from Shaquille Griffin to justify keeping him over Darius Phillips or Kobe Francis, honestly. And the dead money, I believe, will be $1.5 million. That may be something. If I'm a front office guy, I'm looking at Shaquille Griffin, who was a part of that 60-yard run that was given up on Saturday versus the Miami Dolphins. They want to accredit him with a touchdown allowed. I don't necessarily want to give that touchdown to him because I think that was man defense. But the lack of effort from Shaquille Griffin has been completely unjustifiable, right? And that was something that, Cody, if you remember, I brought up originally when he was signed to Houston in terms of in regards to keeping Steven Nelson over Griffin, right? And there were some things that we heard behind the scenes about why Griffin was really booted out of Jacksonville, not to get too deep into it, but the lack of effort, the lack of concentration at times, maybe, but just everything that may happen off the field was affecting how he was approaching the game on the field. He hasn't done it for me. I think Houston would be better off without Shaq Griffin unless they see value in keeping him as that insurance. Jake Hansen, he hasn't been good in coverage, allowing quarterbacks to complete every pass they have targeted his way along with a touchdown. I think that it's time for Jake Hansen to be moved on from. And as much as I wanted to highlight Khalil Davis, as much as I highlighted, Khalil Davis in that first segment, that is for me to make sure that I highlight, in a way, Thomas Booker, a player that I have to eat my own words. I was excited to see how DeMeco Ryans and this defensive coaching staff would utilize him in his sophomore year. I think he has missed entirely too much time, valuable time, to compete for a roster spot. And in his absence, you got guys like Kurt Hennish, Roy Lopez, again, the newcomer Khalil Davis. They have played and practiced very well for Houston. And so I think that when I look at those players, the stock on each of those players have been falling. Will they get cut? That's up to the franchise. I don't have an inside source on that, but I do believe compared to where they were, the stock is plummeting.
The reason why I shouted out one of my all-time favorite singers, Anita Baker, and one of my all-time favorite songs, and I apologize because I feel like I need to apologize to the listeners and viewers because, John, as you know, when the Texans signed Griffin, I was really high on him. I definitely thought that he was going to be a guy who was a shoo-in to make this 53-man roster, especially given that, his goal was to come close to the Pro Bowl caliber year he had with the Seahawks in 2019. I really thought that was possible. And then you also take a look at everything that was going on with Steven Nelson at the time. We all remember everything that went on. He wanted a new contract. He was talking about Nick Caserio on social media, saying, you can't trust these beep 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 with the vest that Nick Caserio liked to wear and everything. And going into training camp, I just thought that Steven Nelson was going to be a detriment to this game. To this team. However, he was the complete opposite. As I mentioned, the Houston Texans have recorded about 14 to 15 takeaways throughout training camp, and Steven Nelson has led everybody on the defensive side of the ball with 4 interceptions alone. You talked about the effort that Shaq Griffin is given. It has been the complete opposite for Steven Nelson. Now, yes, he got his money in the long term, but with Steven Nelson not only reiterating himself as arguably the best cornerback on this team, but it seemed like he has gotten even better. And when you take that into consideration, John, you're talking about keeping Shaq Griffin as an insurance policy. I truly do not believe that the Houston Texans are going to do that because there's no need for Griffin. I always looked at the signing of Griffin as an insurance policy, depending on how things played out with Steven Nelson. You already know Steven Nelson is a shoo-in. Thankfully, the Houston Texans and himself was able to have a kumbaya moment amongst themselves, and he's all good to go in 2023. And when you take a look at the rest of that position group, Derek Stingley Jr., you're definitely not going to pick Griffin over him. Even when you take a look at Tavierre Thomas and Desmond King, you definitely not going to pick Shaq Griffin over those two guys. And so, look, once again, I apologize because I boost Shaq Griffin up a lot. However, when you look at his production, not only just in training camp, but remember, there was moments throughout mandatory minicamp I came on here and said that, he had got beat. He had got burnt. He gave up a touchdown. He gave up receptions. And, part of me still want to give him the benefit of the doubt only because I know he's still trying to come back from that back injury. But, the NFL is a business, and there is no way in the world he's going to make it when you take a look at the rest of the guys that they got in that position group. By the way, before moving on, I do not believe that Thomas Booker is going to get cut. That's a second-year player. I still think there's value in keeping him. I don't think he's going to have the responsibility that he had last year, only because when you take a look at a guy like Jacob Martin, who has helped boost that defensive line unit, I'm pretty sure that the Texans can find some kind of way to keep him. I don't see it, but you just never know.
These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain you have the access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Just add your job, free post on LinkedIn Jobs, and then add your purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you like to interview and hire. This is why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs number one in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome in, Texan fans and listeners out there. Thank you for stopping by. If this is your time, make sure you subscribe, like, and comment. But we got to look at some of the players that may be on the bubble. Cody, one of the players for me, edge rusher Chase Winovich, brought over from Cleveland, but does have those New England Patriot ties, and we know how deep those ties run here in Houston. Chase has been a player that has been kind of cool in this role, nothing spectacular. He did register a sack against the Dolphins. No, not the Dolphins. I think the first game he got a sack against the Patriots. So a homecoming party. Got a couple of QB hits in that first game as well. But I think he's a player, depending on how Houston views this next guy. And y'all may kill me for this one. They could keep around because I also believe Jerry Hughes is also on the bubble.
What?
To make this team. Yeah, I do.
What?
Man. I don't think that I don't think Jerry, and I think that he will, but I don't think it's a shoe-in, if that makes sense. Like, I think Jerry is in a position where I'm talking about guys who I believe may need to, play in this third game. I believe Jerry does as well. I know he led the team in sacks last year, but I'm not just completely giving him a roster spot if there's somebody more deserving than he is.
Wow, that's a shocker.
Wow. Owen Wilson. Wow.
I truly believe that he's a shoo-in, man. I don't see Jerry getting cut like that. Wow, that really threw me for a loop. But if there is a surprise cut that I could see coming, I don't know which one is going to be, but it kind of goes back to what you and I talked about in the last segment. When you look at Shaq Griffin, if by any chance they do keep Shaq Griffin, I can kind of see them cutting either Tavier Thomas or Desmond King, and that only goes back. That goes back to a conversation you and I had a couple months ago around the same time when the Texans had signed Shaq, and I said, I could see a situation where one of those three cornerbacks wasn't going to make the team. And, Tavier Thomas and Desmond King, they have looked decent, but it's one of those things you already know how good both of those guys can be. And when you look at a guy like a Jacoby Francis or a Shaq Griffin or whatever the case might be, if one of those make the 53-man roster at that position that's basically already set and already has great amount of talent. When you take a look at Derek Stingley Jr. and Steven Nelson, I wouldn't be surprised if we'd be like, whoa, did not see that coming. So that's my surprise cut. And go ahead.
No, I like that because, man, Tavier got a little work in against Miami. I think that was Cedric Wilson Jr. Kind of took him in and brought him right back out.
Yeah, and remember, I'm sorry to cut you off, but that let me remember that during the second day of joint practices when Tyreek Hill was tearing up that secondary, he caught one of those touchdowns on Tavier as well.
So I do look at Tavier and Desmond King as a undisclosed battle because, again, to go back to Kobe Francis, he has lined up 22 times primarily in the slot for Houston. So maybe he's a guy that you look at King as a guy you maybe want to keep because of his veteran presence. may look at Tavier Thomas and say, man, we really appreciate you because he's had some good moments for Houston, but we're going to go with somebody a little bit younger who's been more productive in doing what we want to do.
And really quick, I wouldn't necessarily consider this a surprise cut. It's kind of expected at this point, and it's kind of sad. But Garrett Wallow, one of the guys from that 2021 draft class, you take a look at this linebacking group that is deep. And Garrett Wallow, when you just look back at all the highlights, all the guys that we have talked about, training camp, OTAs, mandatory minicamp, whatever the case might be, we never mentioned Garrett Wallow's name. He has had some moments over the last 2 years, but it wasn't enough to say, okay, well, at least he can fall back on what he did for this organization in the past. So, that is a guy that I say, keep an eye on. I know we in any surprise cuts. Like I mentioned, I don't consider him a surprise cut, but I do believe that he is on a bubble unless he go out there and have a phenomenal game. Another name that I'm going to throw in only due to injuries, but it's kind of the opposite of Garrett Wallow in that same position, Christian Kersey. I think he has the time and the film to lean upon and say, you know what? This is why you might want to keep him around. He's another guy that I look at. If he makes the 53-man roster, you might get a better version of him when you call his number, only because he doesn't have that responsibility at that position group like he had over the last 2 seasons. However, once again, throughout the whole entire training camp, he's been dealing, I believe, with a hamstring injury. And NFL is a business, and that might be one of those, yeah, you did really good work for us. You helped lay a foundation for this rebuild, but at this time, we got to move on from you.
I wonder if Houston plays around with the idea of keeping Kirksey just to see if he can actually be productive and maybe judging his first couple of moments whenever he does play football again before they decide to cut him. Remember, if they do cut him, I believe it's $5.5–6.5 million they will save.
Yeah.
So you look at a situation where, just playing around with that idea, you look at a situation where maybe it is best, and I'm just, again, throwing ideas out, but maybe it is best to move on from him now, because what we do know is it's going to be a lot of players looking for new homes come that cut date on August 29th. Christian Kersey is a guy that I think Houston needs to move, smart on, because it could really help you out in the long run. Thank you guys for checking us out today. The Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, is Wednesday. We got 2 more days, and we go team every day. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at Locked On Texans. Give me a follow at John_Hickman12. And subscribe, like, comment to the Locked On Texans podcast on YouTube.
And as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Thread and the artist formerly known as Twitter at Cody Davis _24. Once again, that's Cody, COTYDAVIS _24. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.